Thanks for joining us Behind the Frontline, a podcast providing timeless solutions to everyday workforce and workplace challenges. Frontline Training Solutions is an express employment professionals company, strategically placed between the workplace and the workforce with professionals standing by, ready to combat your unique challenges. Learn more about what we do at frontlineon.com. Hello and welcome again to another episode of Behind the Frontline at Frontline Training Solutions, where we aim to develop people, inspire growth, and unlock potential. And today we're sitting in the studio with Jason Russell, Pete Gerkin, and Janis Petrini. And Jason is the founder and president of SEC Protects, is a former U.S. Secret Service agent, special agent who leads a national team providing proactive safety and threat assessment solutions for schools and organizations across the country. And Pete is a senior lead consultant at SEC Protects. He's a 26-year veteran of the Kent County Sheriff's Office here in Michigan who specializes in school safety, de-escalation, and community security initiatives. And of course, Janis is our co-owner and founder of Frontline Training Solutions, as well as the Grand Rapids, Michigan franchises of Express Employment Professionals and Specialized Recruiting Group. And she brings over 30 years of hands-on experience in strategic planning, business unit development, and people leadership to help organizations and their communities thrive. So I'm excited to be in the studio with you guys today. I'm excited to dive into what SEC Protects does. And so, Jason and Pete, before we jump in, if you can give our listeners just a quick overview of what SEC Protects does and how behavioral threat assessment fits into your work.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. We're excited to be here. I founded SEC 2013 after I left the Secret Service, really because I was a dad. I wanted somebody to do a better job of protecting my own kids. At that time, actually, some of my kids were in childcare, some were in K-12. So our focus at SEC is just overall preparation. So we spend a lot of time with our clients, assessing their facilities, assessing their processes and procedures, looking at a really kind of granular level at everything that touches safety and security. And the behavioral side of safety and security is such a huge, huge piece of it today. So we focus a lot on not only do you have the right door locks and do you have the right cameras and do you have the right, physical components, but what are you doing to address the concerns that you might see in an employee's behavior? So as doing that, we're always trying to select, people that come from that kind of law enforcement security world. So I'll let Pete introduce himself here and kind of talk about his background, but we try to bring on the best professionals we can to support our clients.
Very cool.
Thanks, Nick. I spent 26 years in law enforcement. Jason was at the federal level. I was at the local level. However, we see a lot of the same things. So I spent a lot of times in schools, a lot of times in the community. You're seeing and experiencing different behaviors from those that you encounter. And I think it's helpful to bring a lot of that experience in now when we work directly with schools and businesses, and helping to provide some guidance, talk about our experiences, talk about some solutions, some best practices. And I've been with SEC for 3 years, and it's been a pleasure. And I've built a lot of good relationships in schools and businesses and child care centers. And it's fulfilling to be able to provide some assistance a lot of times where it's really requested and wanted.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I'm so glad that you guys are both with us in the studio today. And Janis, obviously, is the founder and co-owner of our companies here. And we work very closely with clients at a local level, but through Frontline on a national level. And I know that this conversation has come up, and we were very excited to have this conversation. So, Janis, if you wanted to, for our audience, talk a little bit about what we do and why this is so important for us to deliver this conversation to our clients.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for being here. The incredible work that you do and feeling safe and secure at home and at school and at work and in our community is so critical. And I think that part of why it was so wonderful to have you here is really we're in the workforce and the workplace every single day, and we've been doing that for over 30 years between our three companies. And it's just, especially post-COVID, has seemed to be just unprecedented amounts of issues with behavior, a lot of de-escalation that has gone out of control. Our clients are really requesting more training and just how can we provide the level of care that we need to provide to our employees and their families? How can we create a safe workplace for people to feel that they feel safe at work? And then what is that essence of what's the minimum things that companies need to be doing today compared to maybe what they were doing even 5 years ago? So your expertise is so valued and appreciated. And so I think the exciting part is between our frontline clients and our express clients and our specialized recruiting clients, everybody needs this information, and everybody needs to be better trained to be able to help people to feel valued and safe at work.
Absolutely. And, part of that is we were talking a lot about spotting behavioral red flags. And so today I was hoping you can explain, what does that actually mean to spot behavioral red flags, especially in the workplace context? And how can leaders begin to recognize them before they escalate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, we always say if you see something, say something, but we never tell people what you're supposed to be looking for. So, behavioral red flags really are about noticing either anomalies in behavior. So somebody that's working for you whose behavior is changing, or somebody whose behavior, their baseline is just potentially risky or dangerous, right? So we have what we call behaviors of concern that you want to key in on either as a coworker, as a supervisor, or as even a business owner. And we know that these behaviors are linked to potential violence, right? So some examples would be somebody who is discussing being violent, right? Somebody who's making overt violent statements. Somebody who has what we call leakage, which is they're not making direct threats, but they're saying things that might cause somebody concern. Things like, don't show up for work tomorrow, something bad's going to happen, or I'm going to pay you back. Somebody who's had some kind of recent stress, so whether it's financial stress or loss of a relationship. And, I think what we see obviously is there's tons of these little kind of puzzle pieces or dots. I don't know if you were little, you remember you do those connect the dots pictures, and you really can't tell what the picture is until you get a bunch of the dots. If you only have one dot on the paper, you can't really tell what that is. So when we're looking for behaviors of concern or potential indicators of violence, we're trying to gather as many of those dots as possible to say, okay, now we have a clearer picture of maybe this person's propensity for violence, what they're going through in their personal lives. And the goal isn't to punish. The goal is to try to take somebody who might be on that path to violence and get them off of that path, right? So I think we often think of, people that make threats in the workplace or people that are dangerous. We think of those as people that we want to somehow, enforce some rule or some law. The reality is our goal should be to identify those behaviors early enough so that we can intervene and maybe get that person off the path to violence. But in order to do that, people need to know what they're looking for, right? So I think every organization has to start with first a general awareness of, okay, what are these behaviors that I should be looking for? How do I gather that information, right? If you and I worked in a large organization, I might see something that caused me concern, and you might see something that caused you concern. But if we never take those two data points and put them together, we may never know that, hey, this is actually a larger pattern here. So it's about identifying the behaviors, knowing what the behaviors are, and then having a process to say, okay, can we get a better picture of what this person might be experiencing?
Wow. Interesting. Yeah.
I think that may look initially like irritability, increased irritability, some resentment, problems with some coworkers, or it could even be clients. And again, like Jason said, we're kind of looking for a pattern that's different from, if we've been around an employee or a teammate for a while, we kind of have a baseline of what their behavior is. And now we're seeing something different. We're seeing some of those behaviors that now kind of raise and give us a level of concern. And that intervention is important because it's an opportunity. It really is. It's an opportunity. Maybe it's as simple as getting that employee or team member some additional support, some help. Maybe they're struggling with some things. There's a lot of things that we all struggle with. And again, like Jason said, not punitive, but it's actually an opportunity.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You mentioned threats in the workplace. I think a lot of people think of threats as violence. Like it could be an extreme violent situation, which I'm sure it very well could be. But is that all it could be? Is there a broader spectrum that you guys could unpack with what threats would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can have smaller behaviors like Pete mentioned. One of the things that we look for is people that are what we call injustice collectors, right? Some people that no matter what happens, it's never their fault. They're always blaming other people, or they're paranoid or things like that. So we're trying to spot those little behaviors, and then you really use our resources to try to intervene in a positive way. The way I always describe threat assessment, I like visualizations. So I always think about the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. We're going to be, I don't know when this airs, but it'll be sometime around Thanksgiving. And human beings are kind of like those balloons that the people are kind of carrying down the street on the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
Okay.
So most of us, those people that are holding the ropes down, right? They prevent that balloon from kind of going and just flying off. Most of us we have tons of tethers, tons of things that are kind of holding us, keep us grounded, right? People that tend to commit violence or prone to violence have very few of those kind of positive tethers, a relationship that they care about, a job that they value, hobbies, those types of things. And oftentimes before somebody commits violence, we'll see some of those tethers, those things that are holding them to the ground, have been kind of broken. So when I'm talking to workplaces and they're telling me about an employee that they think might be dangerous or that they're worried about, I'm really trying to glean, okay, talk to me about what's happened in the past 6 months. Talk to me about what you know about their personal life and what you know about maybe some of the struggles that they're going through, to try to get a bigger picture of, okay, have they had experienced a loss recently? Are they in some financial trouble? Have they had a loss of a relationship? Have they lost some type of status? So those behaviors that we see, we want to engage as early as possible using some of the things that we have traditionally in workplaces, EAP programs, right? Peer networks. Maybe instead of worrying about how many of those tethers have been cut, maybe we're trying to create new ones, right? So we're trying to create some connection in the workplace so that they feel more connected. Maybe they feel more psychologically safe in the workplace, so they're less likely to want to be violent. So those are the types of things we're looking for.
Well, so good. So, their leader, their immediate leader, we always hear that the most important relationship that someone has is with their immediate supervisor. And I would say some of the things that you're talking about, not that they have to solve all those problems, but that relationship today, in really being able to spot those things and really care about someone at a different level. What would you say to the leader of today who has people in their charge? How do they need to show up?
Well, I think it is about, there's plenty of research that shows people are more satisfied in their job when they feel a psychological safety, right? So not only are they physically safe, but they feel emotionally safe in their workplace. And part of that is really their interaction with their leadership, right? Do I feel like my opinion is valued? Do I feel like the work that I do is valued? Do I feel like I'm being treated appropriately, right? And when I'm not, is there some type of mechanism for me to express that and actually feel like I'm going to be listened to? Oftentimes, the people that we see that have issues, particularly with that first level supervisor, the relationship is either strained or doesn't exist at all. And many times it's because that supervisor may not have the emotional skills to understand what they're looking at, right? They might actually physically be seeing all the things we're describing, but they don't know what they're seeing because they don't know what that puzzle looks like. So I think that training of people at that level to say, hey, you have a responsibility, obviously, for whatever it is you're doing, production or services, whatever it is, but also for making sure that the people that work for you feel like you're somebody they can come to and talk to and somebody they can trust with not only the physical safety, but also that psychological safety.
So good.
Wow.
Most often, successful organizations care about their staff, and staff want to feel that they're cared about from their employer and from their leadership. And I don't think that should just come from, a scheduled meeting where you're going, it's time to discuss our performance review. And that's when you really check in deeply on an employee or staff member. But it's something genuine.
Mm-hmm.
It comes across as a check-in to see how somebody's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an excellent opportunity when we're talking about some of those maybe initial red flags or something. Check in and see how somebody's doing. And it doesn't have to be with everyone that is exhibiting red flags. It should be with everybody. And I think that's what helps create a good culture of openness where staff and employees feel like they can share, which is vital.
And you don't want to wait until the engine light is on, right? I think you think about it like the maintenance of your vehicle. If you wait until the check engine light comes on in your car, you've waited too long and the risk is too high now. That's why you do maintenance, right? So I think, human beings are different, but in many ways we are, we need that regular maintenance. Where we get threats brought to us is when they're so severe that they're obvious, right? The person threatened to bring a weapon in, or they threatened a coworker's life. What I would tell you is those same people who made that overt threat are now doing these things that are very obvious to everybody definitely exhibited some of these smaller behaviors a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And if we had been looking for them and tried to do some positive interventions and say, okay, what's causing this, right? Not how can we punish this person? What's causing this behavior? And is there a way we as an employer can impact that employee to change that behavior? And sometimes we can't, right? Sometimes it's just that's the nature of the person, but we have to be looking for those opportunities.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I know personally, I have felt that definitely in the workplace and just in our society in general, the culture has gotten a bit more sensitive, at least from my perspective, the last maybe 10 years. And so everyone, has different levels of bad days. And what are some ways that, or how can you distinguish maybe from someone who's simply having a string of bad days rather than they're demonstrating behavioral red flags that we need to take seriously?
Honestly, sometimes you can't. But I think the opportunity is if somebody is just having a couple of bad days or having a string of bad days, why can't we intervene as if we don't know what 2 years from now could be like, right? So I think the opportunity is maybe this is a small behavior. It's just an issue between them and a coworker, or it's just a personal issue that they're having. And maybe it's transient. It'll come and go. We see threats that are transient, right? Happens all the time. Somebody's angry. They say something out of anger, but tomorrow they don't feel the same way, right? Threats against actually workplaces are very much the same. The vast majority of threats that people make are transient. In other words, I'm angry, I'm upset about this issue right now, but with the passing of time, I'll be better or I'll move on to something else. So I think it's important to recognize that sometimes transient threats turn into longer term threats. So I don't know that you necessarily can tell this person either is just having a really bad week or this is now a new shift in behavior that we may see long term, right? I think we look for changes in behavior. This person has typically been on time. They've been, they haven't had a lot of interpersonal conflicts. And now all of a sudden that has shifted somehow. Hey, I heard that they're having relationship issues at home or they're having financial issues. And now their job, they're starting to show up late and they're starting to argue with their coworkers. And maybe they're making some concerning statements that just make us a little bit worried. We know that they own weapons, right? Those are the types of things we're like, okay, we don't necessarily need to fire this person, but we might want to sit them down and talk to them and say, hey, how can we help? We know maybe you're struggling. And is there anything we can do to support you?
Wow, absolutely.
I think a couple keywords are persistence. Is this behavior persisting? What's the duration? Is it just somebody, like you said, having a bad day, or is now this a pattern of behavior? And impact, how is it impacting the workplace? Is it having an impact on operations, relationships within the workplace? That's when I think a level of concern should be raised, and intervention is the next right step.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what would you say would be proactively, like foundationally, what kind of training do you think they should have in place to meet some of these type of circumstances, to be a safe company to work at, also to be able to help with the training on some of those behavioral things that they need to be looking for, and to feel equipped actually just to be at just a foundational level today.
Yeah, I think that the biggest mistake companies make is they don't know what they don't know. So we always recommend that you start with an assessment of what you currently have in place, not only from a physical security standpoint, but also from a process procedural standpoint. What kind of training are you doing on, de-escalation strategies? Because de-escalation strategies can reduce interpersonal conflicts, and sometimes those interpersonal conflicts build and build and build, and now we take a person who wasn't prone to violence, and now we've actually essentially we've ignored these things, and now they are. So I always say de-escalation when we train at SEC. We always say de-escalation is the result. It's not like a science. It's the result of proper trained communication, right? And most of us, almost our entire day is spent communicating in some form or fashion with other people. And yet we train almost nobody on how to properly communicate. If you think about it, when you onboard at a company, you get trained on, how to get paid and your insurance and all these other things. But we don't train you on the thing that you're probably going to do the most, which is actually communicate in some form or fashion with other people.
Yeah.
And that ability to communicate positively, and that ability to be able to, understand emotions and behavior, I think is so important. So that baseline level training for me, I think, is de-escalation training or communication training of some sort. And also assessing your processes and procedures to make sure that you have the proper things in place. I was just talking to a client earlier today about, they do a lot of terminations. It's a large company. And what we had to put in place for them, just because we were dealing with so many issues, was kind of a threat, a termination threat checklist to really be able to take all the different types of employee, whether it's a termination or discipline, and try to gauge threat in these individual circumstances. Say, okay, what percentage of people that we're terminating are we thinking could have behavioral issues after we terminate them, or while they're still here at work?
Wow. Yeah. So I spent a good portion of my career in education, communication theory. And so I love what you just said about there. The leaders need communication training, and not just interpersonal communication, but nonverbal communication training and spotting nonverbal threats. I would love to hear from you guys. The fact that you just shared a little bit of a story, I've been hesitant to ask the question because I don't know how much confidential these stories need to remain, but I'd love to hear if you guys have any examples of maybe something that actually did play out in a workplace, what they could have done to prevent that, or maybe even how you guys came in and helped.
Yeah, I've got one, not too long ago. Obviously, we'll leave the specifics of the client, but it was actually a large museum client, and very, I think, proactive in terms of their EAP programs and things like that. But one of the things that I found in workplaces is we get very set in our traditional ways of handling things. And this particular client, they actually had a security guard who was armed, and they had some significant concerns. He had talked about, if I ever get fired, I'm not going to go easy, and the police are going to have to take me out of here, and made some pretty significant veiled threats. So they reached out, and we started working through they needed to terminate this employee. And what was really interesting about that situation was, I said, the guy lived really far away and you would have to take a train into work every day. It took him like an hour. And their plan was to terminate him in person. And I wanted to know why. And they said, well, that's just the way we've always done it. We think that that's the most, and they knew that this was a risk, and yet they were still going to bring this person into the office who they knew was armed and had said, if I get terminated, I'm not going to go quietly. And they were bound and determined that they were going to bring that person into the office because that's the way it had always been done, right? So I intervened and said, this is a terrible idea. Let's terminate this person remotely. Let's not bring him in, make him get an hour, 45-minute train ride, come in with his gun, and then terminate him in person. And I think that, hey, we always have done it this way. I think HR people being creative about what motivates people. If I'm terminating somebody and I have a concern, what are some things that I can do, maybe post termination even, right? That limit their desire to want to be, to seek retribution. So I think one of the things employers have to recognize is, are we done when we terminate somebody, especially if we think they're a risk? I mean, I worked as a Secret Service agent, I worked what we call protective intelligence cases, which is threats against the president. And a lot of people threaten the president. Technically, it's against the law, but if you arrested everybody that threatened the president, a good portion of us,
Right.
a good portion of our population would be in prison right now. So what we're really looking for is not did they make a threat, but are they a threat? Those are two totally different concepts.
Interesting. Okay.
So making a threat and being a threat are not the same. Unfortunately, the only time we actually recognize threats are when people verbalize it, right? So at the Secret Service, actually, we looked at different things. I didn't really care if you said the words. I cared more about, have you shown any behaviors that are consistent with somebody who actually might do something? Have you appeared at protective visits? Have you, do you own weapons? Do you have military training? Do you have financial means that you could travel? And if you look at people that have actually carried out attacks, generally they're not threatening their target. They're quiet about it, because why would I tell you what I'm going to do?
Right.
So
Wow.
From my experience, I think something that probably a lot of employers experience is when somebody's been passed over for a promotion, or in my profession in law enforcement, there's a lot of coveted assignments that people need to put in for, and then you become selected or you're not selected. Somebody is, and if it's not you, that can create a little bit of hostility or jealousy, or you feel that you weren't considered or you were treated unfairly, which can create some resentment. And I've seen where some leadership just kind of allowed that to exist, where now this employee that was not selected may develop a bad attitude, may not now be a good teammate, may not be providing as good a service as they should be to our clientele or to our community. And they can just then be labeled, well, see, that's why. Maybe that's why we didn't select this person, and now this is just a problem person. And I think we need to stay away from that. And we've talked about it, open that line of communication. I think good leadership will sit down with an employee like that and open that line of communication, maybe give some explanation, maybe work on some things this employee can do better or differently to put themselves back in consideration. Even something as simple as let an employee vent, and kind of get that out and hear their reasoning for why they're upset, or have some resentment. And I think that's a very common thing in the workplace, and that's just why communication and that culture of openness, where leadership is willing to sit down with staff and have those conversations, is so important.
Well, absolutely. I would love to hear from both of you how to phrase this question. What would that process look like for signing, contacting SEC Protects? And would you say it's more for like something has happened, or is more like prescriptive, like we don't want something to happen? What would a common example look like, and how would SEC Protects come in and help them?
It's almost like I would love to say that most people are proactive, right? And they reach out and they say, we're going to do this before anything happens. Like the maintenance on your vehicle, right? I'm going to get the tires rotated. I'm going to change the oil. I'm going to do all these things. But most people, unfortunately, most organizations don't do that for whatever reason. And because you have a lot of other things going on, right? You're obviously doing whatever it is your business requires you to do. And safety and security is often not a top priority. And it doesn't come up every day. Safety and security issues don't happen every day. So a lot of people will see after an incident or after a high profile incident, people say, oh, we should probably prepare for that. We would love for people to be proactive and reach out before. The best way, I always use the analogy of like a doctor and a pharmacy, right? When you're sick, you don't go right to the pharmacy and say, hey, here's what's wrong with me. Give me this medicine. You go to the doctor. The doctor examines you, says, hey, here's what's actually wrong with you. Here's the prescription or the treatment for this illness. And then you then go and get that treatment. Most organizations, when it comes to safety and security, they skip the doctor and they go right to the pharmacy. They go right to solutions without the diagnosis. And that's a massive mistake because you can waste resources. You can do things that won't work, quite frankly. You think that they're going to work, and then you invest all this time and resources and realize that wasn't even our threat. We were facing a whole different issue, and we don't have any money left to prepare for our actual threat because we spent it all on cameras or whatever it might be. So we always recommend kind of starting with that diagnosis, that assessment. That's really when a client reaches out, the first question we ask is, have you ever had an assessment done? An assessment is really that diagnosis, deep dive, very granular, to look at what are your policies and procedures for dealing with a potential threat in the workplace? Do you have a consistent process for that? And what really opens people's eyes, truthfully, is liability, truthfully. I mean, I think what we're seeing nowadays, especially when it comes to violence in the workplace, is the warning signs are widely known. It's not a mystery anymore. So when something happens, somebody's going to look back to say, okay, what did you do to prepare for this? And if your answer is, we didn't do anything, then you could be at risk. Whereas if your answer is, look, we had an assessment done, we did training, we have good processes, good procedures, all these things are in place, I think you're in a much better shape in terms of an organization. And the tough thing about security is you can't prove what you prevented, right? I mean, we go into organizations all the time, and if nothing happens, I could claim, hey, we have 100% prevention rate because all the places we've been to have never had a significant incident. But you can't prove what you prevented with good policies, good procedures, good behavior identification, right? I identified this person before they were exhibiting significant warning signs, and I was able to intervene, and I was able to create connection, and I was able to provide them with some psychological safety, and I got them help through the EAP. And they go on and live a totally normal life, and they're a good employee, right? I can't prove what I prevented if it never happened. So that's always a tough one.
Yeah. All right. Janis,
Yes.
maybe from your perspective of leading our three companies, especially Frontline, why would you say, from your perspective, this behavioral awareness training or spotting these red flags, it is important for our clients? I mean, you've been in the workplace, workforce solutions scene for going on 30 years now. What would you say, from your perspective, this is something that our clients should consider?
Yeah, I'm just listening to you both. I mean, there isn't a day that goes by that we don't have a call for an escalated situation, because it could be an employee said something to another employee and it sparked some really horrible words to each other, and that escalated the situation, and that one person felt attacked by the other person. We have to tell people their jobs are ended at companies almost on a daily basis. That can cause a very severe reaction. We have incidents where somebody might have been ended and they text somebody at the company who was their friend and might say, you better watch out. But that turns into a massive lockdown where the person was just using words saying, they were upset. And so every single day, when you work with humanity and you work in situations where we're getting some kind of call. So for our own staff, of course, we went through de-escalation training. We've had different, we're always looking for training. Our international headquarters is providing training because we need to be well trained and well equipped for these type of calls and situations, and also to be able to talk to our employees that are out working across the country. But we also, you can tell from these calls that our our employers are not feeling equipped, that they don't know what to do, that they're counting on us to know what to do. And so I just love that we're having this conversation, because I can tell you that in my mind, the majority of experiences I have had, it's not that there's something wrong. It's just that they haven't had the right training. They don't feel equipped. They don't know what to do. And so this conversation is so valuable. And I'm so glad we're having it. And that's why I was asking about what foundationally, like, where does someone start? What should they be doing next? If I'm going to do one thing this quarter, what should I get started with? Those type of things, just to be able to say to companies and decision makers, that I love what you said about, now when something happens, you're looking back. That looking back is really important. Like, we should be able to say we did this and this and this and this because we cared so much about our workplace and our employees, that's just part of who we are. So I guess in my mind, it's what's your recommendations? I guess what you've said, de-escalation training, which I think is fantastic, because I think not nobody, but very few people know how to do that well. And if you don't do it well, it can turn into even a bigger problem.
Yeah, so. I think to carry on the question that Janis just asked, what's a small, maybe powerful action that companies and organizations, participants listening can, help and take to make their workplace safer, more aware, more connected this week?
Seek training. I mean, truthfully, the interesting thing about, and look at an assessment. An assessment really should be a deep, granular dive to the point. I mean, when I'm doing a company, I'm looking at how the HR office is even laid out. Are you having meetings in this office? And, if you are there wheels on the chair of the person that's sitting across from you? And if there are, I want you to take the wheels off of that chair, because I don't want the person to be able to wheel in front of the door and block you from exiting. But if the chair has wheels on it, then they can just roll over, right? Now, that's a tiny little that's such a granular level piece of detail. But how is my office even laid out? So starting with an assessment, starting with that examination, I think is so important. Pete, what do you think?
Implementing a workplace violence prevention program, to this is, Janis, a lot of your thoughts there. We need to, again, train our leadership the importance and have a process in place for documentation, for collaboration with other leaders. So we're looking at just not, subjective thoughts that this employee may be becoming a problem, but objective things.
Yes.
What are the behaviors? Is this just a one-off where somebody, raised their voice and are angry, or is this person raised their voice in 3 meetings now? This is developed into a pattern. So having a process in place, a program in place to document for consultation. Maybe we need to reach out to our trained behavioral assessment team. That way, if the behavior progresses, we're able to hopefully intervene, number one. But 2, if other action needs to happen, we have the documentation to do that.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I love what you both just said about training, assessments, and then spotting that. I'm curious to know, maybe some final thoughts. I'm curious to know from both of your perspectives. I feel like bias can play a huge role into everything we do, and we all have our biases in some way, but when it comes to human behavior. And so I'd love to know your perspectives on, because we mentioned human behavior a little bit, and a good closing thought. What do you think leaders most underestimate when it comes to human behavior with threats or risk or safety or emotional well-being at work?
I think capacity, somebody's capacity to be violent, right? Somebody's capacity to be harmful. I think especially when you work with somebody for a while and you kind of get used to that person. We've had clients that have had situations where they've had a direct threat. Somebody threatens an employee directly, and because the supervisor knew them, they were like, he's probably not serious. And then in one case, that person actually committed a homicide the next day on the person that he had threatened.
Wow.
And I think it was their lack of capacity to recognize that bad things can happen anywhere at any time. You know, we're sitting here in West Michigan. In West Michigan, we have an affliction called West Michigan Nice, which is we don't think anything bad happens here because, you know, we don't have a lot of significant incidents. So I think the one thing I think that most organizations face is just a lack of belief that it can happen here. It can happen anywhere.
Absolutely.
I think behavior can be predictable. Jason's covered it. Rarely does somebody just snap. There were things that happened. There were things that were said. There were behaviors that were demonstrated well before even violence ever occurs, right? So it can be predictable. And it's that pathway, recognizing those early signs, those concerning behaviors, intervening, whether that's getting an employee's resources. You know, maybe they just need some help. Maybe they're experiencing something in their life that they're struggling with, before we go down that pathway to worst case scenario where there's actually violence in the worst place. But if we don't pay attention to those early signs, I think behavior can be predictable.
Wow. Janis, do you have any other closing thoughts?
I think the majority of people want to feel safe in their communities and at work. And I think that as I listen to you both, I think it's part of the care plan for companies because they care deeply about their employees. I think we've progressed over all these years. You know, it was, well, we have great benefits, or we have an employee assistance program, or we have an employee recognition and reward program, and so I really feel like we've evolved into a very comprehensive type of plan for making our employees feel safe, but also being able to recognize that we have excellent training and that we're going to provide a place for you where we can recognize if things go awry or if someone's having a difficult time, and that the additional layers that companies have put in place with the resources that you have with that assessment, I think that's so critical. And so just as I've been listening to you both and just the questions you've been asking, Nic, I just think it just has to be something that companies are doing as just a part of their organization. And just like we abide by OSHA standards, we abide by the type of things that we need to do to make sure that people feel valued and safe at work. And so I think what we've talked about today are some great solutions, actually.
Absolutely. And, you know, we mentioned earlier in the podcast about regular performance check-ins with those that you're leading. And we call those stay interviews. We actually have a few podcasts and webinars on the topic of stay interviews, but thinking through it with this lens as well as spotting behavioral red flags. So real quick, how can people get in touch with you? I mean, we're going to link your website in the caption, but what's the best way to contact you to bring you guys in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, going to our website, secprotects.com, you know, and scheduling just for a consultation, just an initial kind of call to see what your issues are, right? We can really examine kind of where you're at, what might you need. Often we find some organizations, you know, they don't need what we thought they do, or they don't need what they thought they need. And we really try to start to give them actionable solutions of where to start. And it does usually start with an assessment, right? Let's see where you're at so we can determine what will be useful in the future.
Great. Well, here at Frontline Training Solutions, we develop people, we inspire growth, and we unlock potential, and we aim to keep you and your workplace safe. And so thank you so much, guys, for this conversation today. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Janis.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on Behind the Frontline.